You ever notice how quiet the world becomes in those rare moments when you're finally honest with yourself, when the noise of expectation fades, when the roles you perform fall away, and you're left facing that strangely familiar stranger inside your own mind? There's a particular kind of stillness in those moments, a kind that feels almost like standing at the edge of a great cliff, staring down at the life you've lived so far, wondering how much of it was truly yours and how much was borrowed from the voices around you. You start to sense something unsettling, that behind every decision, every dream, every desire, there might have been a subtle, invisible hand guiding you, not a person, not a rule, but a quiet set of assumptions you never questioned. And as this realization softens into focus, you notice how many people spend their whole lives like this, drifting through days that look full but feel hollow, chasing goals that were never theirs to begin with. You see it in the hurried conversations at work, in the forced laughter at dinners, in the tense silence of someone who knows they are meant for more but can't say why they never begin. And maybe, just maybe, you sense it in yourself, the weight of unused potential. The faint ache of something inside you that knows it could soar but settles for walking because everyone else is walking too. It's a strange paradox. You were born limitless, yet somehow learn to live as if the borders around your life were etched in stone. And so you sit with this quiet question, the one that slips into your consciousness in the late hours of the night, or in the brief pause before you fall asleep. What if the only thing standing between you and the person you're meant to become is the story you've been telling yourself about who you are? If that's true, then everything can change quietly, suddenly, completely. Most people move through life as if following an invisible script, never questioning who wrote it or why they're performing it so faithfully. And when you begin to see this, it's like watching a grand play where no one realizes they're on stage. You notice it in the smallest, most ordinary places, at a crowded cafe where people laugh a little too loudly, rehearsing confidence they don't actually feel, or at a family gathering where everyone talks over each other but no one really says anything at all, or in the dim commute where faces glow from the blue light of screens, each person scrolling through the lives of others while quietly neglecting their own. You start to see how people move in predictable loops, waking up, rushing through a morning they barely remember, working jobs that drain more energy than they offer, scrolling through distractions to numb the quiet dissatisfaction they never speak aloud. They convince themselves they're busy, that they're trying, that they're doing their best. Yet deep down, something exerts subtle tension between the life they live and the life they imagine in the privacy of their own mind. And the illusion becomes even clearer when you watch the way people talk about their dreams. They speak of them as if discussing distant stars, beautiful but unreachable. And so they settle, not because they want to, but because settling is easier than confronting the fear that maybe they're capable of more than they've allowed themselves to believe. They tell themselves they'll start when things calm down, or when the timing is right, or when they feel ready, not realizing that these are just elegant disguises for the same quiet avoidance. And underneath all of this is an unspoken psychological movement. People cling to the familiar, even when it makes them miserable, because the familiar feels safer than the unknown. So they keep repeating the same behaviors, forming the same relationships, making the same mistakes, and convincing themselves it's just the way life is. And you look at the mat, the forced smiles, the muted frustrations, the desperation hidden beneath politeness, and it hits you with a strange sadness. Most people aren't choosing their lives. They're simply following them. They don't notice the subtle emotional autopilot steering them through each day, nor the countless small moments where they surrender pieces of themselves for comfort, approval, or routine. But once you see this once, the illusion cracks. For you it becomes impossible to unsee. The world feels different, heavier, clearer, as if someone lifted a veil, and all the invisible strings that guide human behavior suddenly glow under the light of awareness. And as you witness this, a quiet question rises inside you. If so many people are sleepwalking through their lives, how do you make sure you don't fall back into the dream? There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when something inside you clicks, like a door you didn't know existed, suddenly swinging open. and you find yourself looking at your life with a clarity that feels both liberating and terrifying. It's the instant you realize that the patterns you saw in others also live in you, woven into your habits, your excuses, your fears, your unspoken hopes. And this realization lands not as a harsh judgment, but as a strange, piercing truth that stirs your entire inner world. Suddenly, you begin to notice everything. The way you hesitate before taking a risk. The way you silence yourself in conversations to avoid discomfort. The way you pretend not to care about things that matter deeply to you. The way you cling to routines that suffocate your potential simply because they feel familiar. It's as if your inner observer awakens, stepping forward with a lantern, illuminating all the corners you've avoided, the dreams you buried under practicality, the passions you labeled unrealistic, the talents you brushed aside because someone once told you they weren't valuable. And this illumination is not calm. It shakes you, rattles you, disrupts the life you built on autopilot. You begin questioning everything you once accepted without thought. Why do I do this? Who taught me this? What am I afraid will happen if I change? And with each question, the old narrative of your life loosens its grip, and a new possibility begins to breathe. But awakening comes with wetter kind of emotional gravity that pulls you into deeper awareness than you're used to. You notice the subtle ways people manipulate one another, the quiet desperation behind their choices, the fragile facades they hold onto as shields. You sense how much suffering comes from unconsciousness, how much potential dissolves into routines that no one ever challenges. And for a moment, you may feel suspended between worlds, the old one that no longer fits, and the new one that feels too vast to step into. It's unnerving. This clarity, it makes the world appear both beautiful and unbearably fragile at the same time. And as you stand on this threshold between who you were and who you might become, a profound question arises in the silence between your breaths. Now that you see the truth, what are you willing to do with it? Awakening is not the golden sunrise people imagine. More often, it begins as a quiet storm. A subtle unraveling that separates you from the world you once moved through so effortlessly. And suddenly you find yourself standing on the outside of conversations you used to participate in, noticing how hollow they feel, how much of what people say is a form of camouflage, how rarely anyone speaks from the raw center of their being. You start to feel a strange distance growing between you and others, not because you no longer care, but because you now see beneath the surface of their words, into the fears they hide, the insecurities they dress up as certainty, the silent compromises they've made with life. And this depth of seeing carries a loneliness no one warns you about. You walk into a room and sense tension in the air before a single word is spoken. You hear the story beneath someone's smile. You feel the heaviness someone tries to conceal. You understand the unspoken messages people exchange out of habit rather than choice. It becomes overwhelming, almost intrusive, as if you've been handed a second pair of eyes that never close. And the irony is painful. The more clearly you see, the more invisible you begin to feel. You try to share your thoughts, your realizations, your questions, but people interpret them as overthinking, pessimism, or distance. Because most people don't want to look beyond their illusions, they want comfort. Not clarity, even if the comfort is made of smoke. And so, you pull back, not out of superiority, but out of self-preservation. You learn to nod in conversations that feel shallow, to smile when someone misreads your quiet for detachment, to carry your depth privately because the world rarely knows what to do with someone who refuses to sleepwalk. The isolation deepens when you attempt to help someone you care about see what you see when you gently offer them a truth they're not ready for, and they retreat, or get defensive, or accuse you of being dramatic. And so you learn another harsh truth. Awareness creates distance. Not because it pushes others away, but because it stretches you beyond the edges of the life you once shared with them. You become like the character in an old story, the one who sees the cracks in the walls of his village, tries to explain it, and is met with confusion and fear, until he is left wandering alone with the knowledge he never asked for. But within this loneliness, there is also a strange, delicate beauty, a sense that you're beginning to inhabit your own life for the first time, even if no one else can walk with you yet. And as you sit with this paradox, this aching mix of clarity and isolation, you find yourself wondering quietly, is this distance the price of becoming who you truly are, or simply the space you must walk through before you meet those who can see you clearly? At some point, the isolation begins to morph into a deeper internal conflict, a quiet battle between the part of you that wants to step fully into this new awareness and the part that still longs for the warmth of belonging. And this tension creates a storm inside you that feels both intimate and exhausting. Because now you can see the truth behind people's actions, their pain, their unspoken fears, and you feel an instinctive pull to help, to guide, to intervene. As if your clarity obligates you to lift others out of their unconscious patterns. But you quickly discover the painful paradox. You cannot save people from illusions they are still in love with. You watch someone you care about fall into the same cycle again, the same unhealthy relationship, the same self-sabotage, the same limiting belief, and you feel the words gather in your throat. The truth you want to offer them, the clarity that could change everything, yet you hesitate because you've learned how truth can feel like a threat to someone who isn't ready to face themselves. And so you wrestle with the question, do I speak, knowing they might push me away? Or do I stay silent, knowing they may suffer needlessly? This dilemma becomes a constant companion, an emotional weight that sits behind your ribs. Because you understand both sides too well, the comfort of denial and the sharpness of awakening. You start to notice how often you censor yourself, how often you swallow truths simply to preserve harmony, and each time you do, a small part of you feels the sting of betrayal, not of them, but of yourself. And yet, when you try to share what you see, when you try to help someone rise above their illusions, they might mistake your compassion for criticism, your insight for distance, your honesty for harshness. You find yourself living in this delicate in-between space, pulled between empathy and self-protection, wanting to guide others but afraid of carrying burdens that aren't yours to hold. And slowly, this internal conflict begins to drain you. Not because you are wrong to care, but because caring without boundaries becomes a form of self-neglect. And so the question lingers, unresolved and heavy. How do you honor your truth without losing your connection to others? And how do you love people without losing yourself in the process? There comes a point when the weight of seeing, feeling, understanding, and holding too much begins to press against the deepest parts of you. And even though you've tried to be patient, tried to be gentle with others, tried to balance truth with compassion, something inside you begins to crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but in quiet, private ways no one else notices. You start waking up tired, even after long nights of sleep. Your mind feels heavy, as if soaked in a fog of thoughts you can't fully escape, and you feel emotions more intensely than they arrive, absorbing the frustrations and fears of others like a sponge that has forgotten it can be wrung out. There are days when even small interactions drain you of forced conversations. The polite pretenses, the weight of watching people repeat the same patterns you once rescued yourself from. And slowly, exhaustion becomes a constant companion. Not just physical, but emotional, spiritual, existential. You begin to feel stretched thin between worlds, the world you've awakened to, and the world that still lulls others to sleep, and the tension becomes unbearable. You try to tell yourself to let go, but your mind keeps grasping, analyzing, interpreting every nuance of every moment, until your awareness becomes less like a gift and more like 1,000 open windows you can't close. Life starts to feel overwhelming in a way that's difficult to explain. It's as if you're carrying too much light in a body built for shadows, and the brightness begins to burn from the inside. Your thoughts spiral into overanalysis. Your empathy becomes a burden. Your clarity turns into overstimulation. And every unresolved emotion inside you begins to rise, demanding to be felt all at once. And then, inevitably, comes the collapse, not a dramatic fall, but a quiet internal folding, a moment where you realize you cannot keep feeling everything so deeply without losing yourself. You withdraw, not out of choice but necessity, craving silence, craving rest, craving anonymity from your own thoughts. It feels as though you're drowning in awareness, overwhelmed by the weight of seeing too much. understanding too deeply, caring too fiercely. And in this fragile, disoriented state, a haunting question forms inside you, a question that echoes in the hollow spaces of your mind. What good is awareness if it costs you the very peace you were searching for in the first place? But somewhere within that collapse, within the heaviness, the exhaustion, you begin to sense something softer emerging, like a faint light behind a curtain you never thought to pull back. At first it feels almost accidental, like a moment of grace breaking through the noise of your mind. A quiet realization that awareness was never meant to be carried as a weight, but held as a guide. You begin to understand that the problem was never that you saw too much, but that you tried to hold everything you saw as if it were your responsibility to fix it. And slowly, a new kind of clarity begins to bloom. Clarity rooted not in intensity, but in permission. Permission to release what isn't yours. Permission to let people walk their own paths. Permission to distinguish between compassion and self-sacrifice. You realize that most of your suffering came from confusing empathy with obligation, insight with intervention, awareness with the need to rescue. And in this gentle shift, something inside you loosens. You begin to see that people don't awaken because someone pushes them. They awaken because life nudges them at the right time, in the right way, in the right moment of readiness. Your role was never to be their savior, it was simply to be a human being who sees clearly. And this realization brings with it a deep, unexpected peace. You begin to understand the quiet power of boundaries, how they protect your energy without dimming your compassion, how they allow you to love without losing yourself, how they guide you toward relationships that nourish rather than drain. You start listening less to the noise of others' expectations and more to the soft intelligence of your own inner world. The intuition that whispers instead of shouts. The wisdom that arrives when you stop forcing clarity and start allowing it. And with this shift comes another revelation, one even more profound. Awareness doesn't have to isolate you. It can connect you more deeply to the world. Once you stop trying to carry what the world never asked of you, you begin to move differently, lighter, slower, steadier. You speak less but say more. You help without forcing, listen without absorbing, love without disappearing. You start to see your own potential, not as a distant mountain to climb, but as a quiet unfolding already happening beneath the surface. And slowly, your life becomes less about fixing and more about flowing, less about proving and more about being. The world hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has, and in that shift, a possibility opens before you. The possibility of living with depth and ease, awareness and peace, clarity and freedom. And so, the question gently rises inside you, not as a burden, but as an invitation. Now that you finally understand how to hold your awareness without drowning in it, are you ready to step into the person you were always meant to become? And so you arrive at a quieter place, not an ending, but a soft return to yourself. The kind that feels like waking up from a long dream you didn't know you were in. Life hasn't become perfect, nor have you suddenly found all the answers. But something fundamental inside you has shifted. You are no longer moving unconsciously through the world. No longer bending yourself to fit into spaces that shrink you. No longer living as a character in a story someone else wrote. Instead, you walk with a steadier rhythm now. Grounded yet open, aware yet unburdened, seeing clearly without drowning in what you see. You begin to understand that potential is not a destination waiting at the top of some distant mountain, but a quiet seed within you, one that grows each time you choose authenticity over approval, presence over distraction, courage over comfort, truth over illusion. You realize that the paradox that once haunted you, that you were born limitless, yet taught to live small, was never a curse, but an invitation to remember your own vastness. And now, with this integration settling into your bones, you start to live differently. You speak with intention. Take risks aligned with your inner compass, honor your boundaries without apology, and nurture your dreams without waiting for permission. You find peace not by withdrawing from the world, but by engaging with it, consciously knowing what is yours to carry and what was never meant to rest on your shoulders. The isolation that once weighed on you becomes a gentle solitude that strengthens you. The conflict that once tore you apart becomes clarity. The collapse that once frightened you becomes the fertile ground for renewal. And when you look at others now, you no longer see people to save you, see souls on their own journeys, learning in their own time, awakening in their own way. This understanding frees you, it frees them, and it frees the future you are stepping into. You return to the very question that opened this entire path. What if the only thing standing between you and the person you're meant to become is the story you tell yourself? But now you know the truth. You are no longer bound by that old story. You are writing a new one, moment by moment, breath by breath, choice by conscious choice. And in that quiet, powerful unfolding, you finally step into the vast potential that was waiting for you all along.